I'd rather create something that others criticise than create nothing and criticise others.
If you have high quality product behind the bar, it's like a weapon.
It's not about the figures, it's about who those figures are.
The Hospopreneurs Podcast.
I'm going to drink this beer.
Yeah, let's crack them.
With James Henderson. Blake Hall is a passionate professional, long-time listener and friend of mine. He opens conversation on the craft, injury, further study, comps, and what he's doing with Patient Wolf, a Melbourne-born gin company. If you missed the video on Facebook, there is a little friend of ours who sits in and watches everything that happens. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the audio. Cheers. Hello and welcome to the show, Blake.
How you doing?
Very well, thanks, mate. Very well. Thank you for having me in your humble abode.
Oh, it's Mikasa Sukasa.
Ah, thank you. So it's excellent to be visiting Melbourne. I'm here for the podcast awards, so waiting to see if we won. And by the time this episode comes out, we will know the result. I'll either be very proud to say or enjoy looking back on this experience, or cringe at the fact that I've mentioned the podcast awards. So
I'm feeling confident. I think it's going to be fine.
Thank you very much. The first question I like to ask all guests on the show is, what is your crazy hospitality story?
I'm just going to let you know, I might be a bit distracted today, by the way. Because,
That's no problem.
As you've probably put out a little bit of a video, we're actually making a gin.
Yes.
So we've actually got a little still running right now, so I may have to run in and check on that. But we're going to find out what James's first gin tastes like.
You've let me have full reign over the botanicals.
You nervous?
So I am a little bit, but
you'd probably be fine.
Our first little taste was alright. It's the head, so we'll see how we go.
Okay, cool. My crazy hospitality story, and I've heard a lot of different bartenders and people say this on the show, is actually, it's something that I refer to as the saga of Kimura. I've done a lot of cocktail competitions over my time in the industry. One of the people that really I look up to is a guy named George Kimura, and he's represented Australia maybe 5 or 6 times in international cocktail competitions and come second place in the world in G-Vine Gin and third place in the world in Martin Miller's, I believe, and runs a venue called 18th Amendment. And it's out in Geelong. It's a city just out of Melbourne, which is a really interesting place. He wanted to create his own brand, but rather than doing all this high-end, high-class kind of stuff, he actually released a range of liqueurs called Kimura liqueurs. These things are awesome. They've got one that's in a butterfly-shaped bottle. They're all in butterfly-shaped bottles, and he makes things like fairy floss and fruit tingle and raspberry liqueurs. And he held this cocktail competition. And the whole idea of this comp was, instead of being super serious, let's have fun with it. So everyone's breaking out glitter and streamers and fairy wings. So I went the opposite way. Basically, I actually took the fairy floss liqueur and I distilled it into a vodka and made a G-Vine Floraison Vespa Martini called the Crystal Winchester Martini.
Yep.
And I dimmed the lights and I played smooth piano jazz and lit candles and dressed up in a waistcoat and talked about how Geelong was the world's classiest city and got disqualified because I'd actually redistilled the liqueur and changed it.
And that's out of the rules.
That's how that. So that round 1, I was out. There were three.
Yeah.
There were 3 rounds before the finals. So round 2, I went back in, and I'm competing against my best friend Greg in this round again. We both went for it, and it was fruit tingle. So I made a clarified citric solution, and then we added a chemical to it to make it change color on stage. Greg helped me with that, and I helped him with his drinks. And then I stirred it down into a lavender and lemon myrtle infused Vucare, like a really nice cognac and rye. And you had to put 15 ml in, so I made a massive show of dimming the lights and playing smooth piano jazz and making up more facts about Geelong. Like Bentleys are from Geelong, and cognac is made in Geelong and then shipped off to France so people aren't too intimidated to buy it. And all this just ridiculous stuff. And I only put 10 ml in instead of 15 ml of the liqueur, which was a big no-no, and got disqualified. So then I entered round 3, and I made a, char-grilled pineapple and black cardamom infused peated whiskey. Old fashions with a char-grilled pineapple and peated whiskey fog with dry ice, and I sang a song called Atomic Cocktail, and in the middle of it I actually had someone come in and pour out all the ingredients while I sang a made-up jazz number about the song, and did the exact same thing, and actually invited the royal family of Geelong, George and his wife Leanne, up onto the stage and gave them crowns, and they knighted me and did some other weird things. Jeremy Spencer was emceeing, which was terrifying. Yes. and I actually won that one, which was great. So I went to the final. So now it's the final. I'm going up against these incredible bartenders, all making just stupidly fun drinks. And I'm stuck with the theme. But I'm going up against my best friend, Greg. He's an amazing guy. And he does very scientific drinks, so we swapped a little bit. And he comes out on stage first. He's the first person going up. And he's talking about how the royal family of Geelong are coming and he's prepared a gift for them. And he had the 5 judges as the guests. And everyone's sort of going, that's the royal family from Blake's competition. And I came running onto stage freaking out because the gift that we had to present to them had been stolen. And it was last seen in the world's classiest bar, the Camorra Club, in 1926 Geelong. So we had a smoke machine and a lighting rig, and we went back in time and pulled the judges with us and landed ourselves in the world's classiest bar. So we had to blend in and have no one know that we were from the future. So I went running around trying to asking everyone in the audience if they'd seen this gift. Greg had to pretend to be a bartender and entertain the judges and got them to play along. And we eventually found the gift, and we were about to go back to the future, but then the time machine broke. And he had 10 minutes to do this, and by that stage the 10 minutes was up, so we just froze, and then just walked off stage. And there were a bunch of other competitors, and then when I went up, I think it was last, we actually just unfroze and kept going from the same position.
That's awesome. So this is all a made-up story.
Yeah.
All right. And people are likely to be listening, thinking, I don't know about the Camorra Club in 1926. Was there a Camorra Club in 1926, or is there anything factual about any of the story that you've just made up?
If there's one thing that I can guarantee for you, James, it's that there was not a Camorra Club in 1926 Geelong. There was definitely no such thing, but we had fun with it. We entertained the guests, we entertained the judges, and it was all about, when you're behind that bar, entertaining everyone in the room, not just the judges. And we didn't win. We didn't take out first place. A guy from Geelong actually won, and his drink was incredible. We had a hell of a lot of fun doing it.
You put it on a show.
Yeah.
And that's what's important about it, I think. It's interesting. I've not had a crazy hospitality story that's about a comp. So you're the first one to talk about a comp.
I've got plenty.
Some have been with being a patron, or some have been from behind the bar observing something, but I've not had a comp story yet. So that's a very interesting story. Thank you very much for sharing your crazy hospitality story.
It's a pleasure.
Blake, the next question I like to ask is why you do what you do.
I absolutely love what I do. I mean, I actually first moved to Melbourne over 8 years ago now because I wanted to be a musician. It was this crazy art, and I actually had a phobia of alcohol when I was younger. I started drinking at 19. There was nothing wrong with it. Everyone started drinking and I wasn't quite ready, and turned it into this big monster of a thing that was in my head. And then after that, when I moved over here and got a job in a casino and I had to learn about alcohol, it was actually really fascinating to me. Seeing and hearing the different stories and learning how it was produced was something I found amazing. So I started tasting and appreciating, but unfortunately I didn't get the fun part of drinking Fruity Lexia in a park.
I didn't have that either.
Oh, man. It's a tough life for us. We're way behind the curve, but
we can't talk about those Fruity Lexia stories. The Fruity Lexia notes, the fine
drinking Fruity Lexia in the park.
I can't even.
After 18 years old and one day, of course. I didn't get to do that. So I got to learn about how fascinating it was, and all of a sudden I get to see how things work from behind the scenes and have something to strive to try to... I saw it almost competitively when I was younger. When I started in a group of people, there were about 10 of us in a traineeship. So I got to try to compete with the others, and I took it very seriously and learn, and it was just fascinating. It was really fun that I got to have this artistic expression and teach people that I'm working with and learn from people and pass that on to my guests. It was very instantly rewarding. I didn't mind the hours. It was difficult, but it was a great thing. And the further I go into this industry, the more that I learn, and it's something you never stop learning. And for me, that's the best part of it.
So tell me a bit more about what it is about your background, because we're going to get into that, about why. I want to know on a deeper level what it is that really inspires you about hospitality.
At the start of my career, it was about learning as many different things as I can and being excited by it. All of a sudden, when I was starting out, I met these people, these mentors, these amazing sort of guys that I really looked up to. In the casino, we had some great training, but also a lot of it was a bit outdated. The first drink I learned to make was a fruit tingle. They had these guys like Sean Baxter, and who else did we have? We had Linus Shaxman coming in and teaching us these different drinks. Jason Crawley came in one day, and I just learned how to make a Japanese slipper and a Midori splice. And then he came in for a non-mandatory training and taught us how to make a white chocolate and cauliflower Ramos gin fizz. That blew my brain. All of a sudden I had this person to go, that's cool. I want to be like that person. I want to be able to take people and teach them things and give them something to strive for. And I think that's really driven me to push to where I am today. and to work actually quite closely with a lot of these people that I really looked up to now and see how well they're doing, it's a really exciting thing.
So Blake, tell us a bit more about what you do.
Arguably one of the best jobs in the world. I worked for a distillery called Patient Wolf. I met the guys actually when I was setting up this tiny little 20-seater speakeasy out the back of a barbershop, and we actually had this big focus on gin and whiskey. Originally it was supposed to be a whiskey bar, but my gin outsold it 5 to 1, so we kind of had to mix it up. And the theme of the bar was that we only had 3 different styles of spirit. So we had 3 agave spirits, and we had a white rum, a dark rum, and a spiced rum. It was very small. We didn't have things that you wouldn't necessarily need all the time in a bar. If you wanted a cosmopolitan, we didn't have cranberry juice. It was just no space. Our mojito, because we didn't carry mint, if you ordered a mojito, we had a special mojito that was literally just a daiquiri garnished with a stick of gum.
I like that. I actually like that.
It was good. We got a few weird looks, but it was interesting. We had a bit of a joke with the customers, and they got it because it was a charming little space. I was working on that. I only had 3 dry gins, 3 floral gins, and 3 spicy or herbaceous-driven gins, and I had this massive list of different gins that I wanted to pull in and actually stock in the bar. And these guys from Patient Wolf actually came in, and as a small little gin brand, 2 guys, it's a very small company. I was unfortunately, just the gin shelf was booked. It was full up. I had no space for it. And I tried the gin and I played around with the product, and they left me a little bit to sample and just give it a go, because we actually sold more gin and tonic flights than we did cocktails. It was all about education for customers. That's why a lot of people liked what we were doing. And after I tried it, that sort of became my favorite gin. It had something really unique about it, so we did a cocktail competition with them. I organized this competition, which is something I'm very passionate about. But at the end of it, the guys said, do you want to come and work with us and help us get to know the bar side of things? So now my main job for working for Patient Wolf is to get out there and show the brand off. So I've got a parrot who's a little chatty today. Get out there and show the brand off as much as I can. But I'm not a sales rep by any stretch of the imagination. I'm pretty terrible at that. I'm not as organized as our man Sam is on the ground, who's just amazing at his job. But to do these activations, if you want help in your bar, if you want to do an event or a gin pairing or a tasting or a training session, I get to get involved and actually work very closely with the distillery. And now I'm actually learning how to distill. I got to help create a line of gin, which was so rewarding. And now we're just working on building the brand and working very closely with that, and also working closely with bars and bartenders as well.
And you shared some of the sort of inside knowledge and experience with doing gin trainings with me earlier, and that the video that we've put up online to extend that passion for gin with the broader Hospopreneurs community as well. So thank you for doing that. And I'm excited to see how our gin turns out today while we're doing this episode. So that's very, very exciting.
It's looking
How's
good.
it tasting, by the way?
The orange has come through, and now it's starting to get a bit herbaceous. Here, try it.
Awesome. Let's do it.
It's literally running off the still as we're speaking. I mean, we were talking about before, the cool thing about gin is that each botanical will come out at a different time. So every time we go to have a little taste and a little smell, we're trying something new.
That's really cool.
It's going well. I thought the citrus would come out for a little bit longer, but I think it's actually going to be really well balanced.
Awesome. Well, I'm very pleased. Thank you.
Good job.
Both of us. It's team effort. Blake, I want to ask you a bit more about an experience you had where you were injured in the bar. Tell us a bit about the experience you had with that, and even how you think the hospitality industry deals with problems like this, and what actually happened.
I was working at this venue called Katuk. A venue was actually opening up called Hats and Tats, and I was in need of a job until Hats and Tats opened. So I decided to go into Katuk and ask for a basic bartender job, and I didn't have the confidence to get into management. But the manager, Andy Buntine, actually said, I need an assistant manager. And straight away, I didn't think that I was ready for it, but he convinced me and actually made me have a go at it, and I was probably pretty terrible, but I worked harder and I was doing really well. I was there for maybe 8 months. I wasn't planning on leaving that venue for a long time. That was me locked in. I was super excited to be there. But unfortunately, one night, I actually went down to the beach, and there's a little ledge just off the edge of the beach, goes down from the footpath, stops the sand from blowing everywhere. It's just about knee height. And I stepped off that, and when I landed, I actually, what was known as a spiral fracture. I had my shin bone basically twisted around and splintered all the way up, and dislocated my ankle, and I had to get rushed off to hospital, and they had to pull it all out, and I ended up spending about 6 days in hospital, which is really nice. It was terrible, but I had 20 people or so come to visit over that stage, which I kind of remember. And when they finally let me out there, I didn't walk unassisted for about 8 months. And even then it was tricky. It was really hard to learn how to walk again, and I couldn't fly back home. Unfortunately, my injury was too severe for me to get on a plane. So I just had to sort of chill out and figure out what I was going to do. I wasn't able to work. I wasn't able to walk. I wasn't able to really feed myself properly. It was really hard to live with. Then someone who I've known for years, who actually met me when I worked for the casino, his name's Justin Strazala, put like a little bit of booze together, and he threw it down to the bar and he went, "Hey, look, let's sell this and let's try to get a little bit of a charity sort of thing going on." And then somebody else went, "Oh, that's really cool, I'm going to flick some in." And then somebody else did that. And then some friends of mine, old housemates, people in the industry, my old housemate Harley, George Kimura, Andy Griffiths from Speakeasy Group, they donated personal bottles of chartreuse or whiskey, or Dick Blanchard dropped off a bottle of Balvenie 21 and they held an auction. And it got picked up, but it was actually a lot bigger than we thought it would be. And with that money, I was actually able to stop and relax and recover and think about what I was going to do and just take my time and learn how to walk. And it was just a bit here and a bit there, and then some very generous offers from other people, but they did that and helped me learn how to walk again. And that was just hospitality looking after their own. That was something they did off their own back, and without that I would have been in a big world of trouble. That could have been it for me in the industry. And now I have them to thank every day that I leave the house and actually walk around, let alone the amazing opportunities I've had since then. Was just learning how to cope with that injury, and it still hurts. Doing long shifts on my ankle, I got about 20 centimeters nearly of metal in there. I think something like 13 bolts and screws. But I can take the time, and now I've been able to do that and go through the physio that I can actually still work on my feet, which is amazing.
That's really incredible, obviously, that the industry pitches in and helps you as much as it can. Blake is not joking about this bird on his shoulder, and I've got a photo that I've posted up on Facebook about it.
I'm trying to keep him quiet.
It is no joke, but he's actually doing pretty well. Blake, I want to ask you about what your perspective is on training. So further education regarding, say, for example, your Cert 4 with your SOM training.
Yeah. So training's something that I'm ridiculously passionate about. I love to teach my staff. I like to work very closely with my team members, and I've been known to type up quizzes on tequila and pass it out to everybody. My housemate Frank can probably tell some stories about how I can go a little bit too in depth with thermodynamics and dilution levels or grain mashes. It's something that I love to understand and try to teach as much as I can. And I think that came from learning all this awesome knowledge from these incredible people at the start. Training's something really important in hospitality, especially now that we've got such an influx of information. You've got Facebook groups and websites and hospitality magazines that are all trying to teach everybody how to work with different brands and work with different products. So when I originally, actually before I got into cocktails and whiskey and gin, wine was kind of the focus that I wanted to work with. I wanted to work closely with restaurants and work closely with sommeliers and chefs and really make it part of that experience. So I got this great opportunity that I did a certificate for through Holmesglen TAFE involved with Crown Casino, and it was amazing. I'd have to go there every week and get in at 9 a.m, which was probably the worst part of it. But then we'd do an element on, say, Pinot Gris, and they'd just be like, cool, let's talk about Pinot Gris and soil types, and let's talk about rainfall and temperatures and mediums and Bommet and harvest times and all this incredible stuff, and then be like, this is what they do. Here's 15 Pinot Gris. And you just watch your tasting notes in your little book just get weirder and weirder and weirder the more that you drink them. And it was a really cool experience. After that, it wasn't a WSET, it wasn't a WSET level 3 or 4. It was really useful information that focused more on Australian wine. Now I'm in a position where I actually do work a lot more closely with wine. For my second job, I work in, I've just actually started moving back into liquor retail, giving a bit of a break from the bars lately. And I've kind of noticed that this was really interesting and really useful information 6 years ago, but the industry has changed so much that I'm noticing that these pieces of paper help me form an understanding, but doesn't always have the necessary knowledge that I need. So now I'm just trying to work on figuring out exactly what I can do to make sure that I can try to keep up to date with the knowledge and the training and the information that I get to go to. I mean, every single week we've got multiple trainings in Melbourne, which are really great to be a part of. And rather than just talking about brands, I like to talk about giving people a basic understanding as to Why do old school gins, Tanqueray, Beefeater, why do they follow such similar styles when you compare them to something like Hendrick's or Four Pillars or Green Ant Gin? Whiskies from Islay, why are they all generally peated? What are the reasons as to why that happens, and how can I find an interesting and engaging way to pass on that information to my staff and actually make it a lot easier for them to learn knowledge in the future? Invest in the very start of production, so next time they go and they try a product or a tasting, they have that understanding as a base backbone.
So how are you going about doing that?
One of the ways that I like to talk a little bit about peated whiskey, actually, any of your big smoky whiskies, it's something that I love to sort of teach customers about. I use a story about how when you go to these tiny little islands, they're actually off the coast of Scotland, they're so small that they're always so close to the ocean, there aren't any forests. So they don't exactly have any wood to burn and coal to sort of harvest and use to dry out the barley when they're making whiskey. They also didn't get gas heating for a very long time, so they would go to these peat bogs and dig this peat bog out of the ground and burn that and impart that smoky flavour. Once gas finally did come to their island, it was just synonymous with their whiskey style. So all of a sudden people understand why it is that these whiskies actually are really driven by this amazing smoky flavour, and why these whiskies further inland that can use gas or use coal have a much softer, woodier flavour. And then we go into a bit more detail. We talk about how, depending on the vegetation and soil type in the area where they dig their peat from, really imparts a different flavour. I've had peat burned from Tasmania, and it smelled like eucalyptus because that's what was growing in the area. So that's going to change that element of whiskey, and that's what I love about whiskey. It's about doing something very, very similar to everybody else, but with your own tiny little differences and having that really shine through in the end product. But when you start to understand these whiskies are peated for this reason, but also they've got different flavours depending on where the ground's from, and that's because of the soil type. Now I understand it. Now every time that you taste a whiskey, you go, oh, where's it from? You can point to it on a map. You can start to make educated assumptions. And for me, it was about trying to learn heaps and heaps about different bourbons, and years ago I needed to learn about the flavour profile of them all. But I didn't understand that they were made from different grain mashes. I didn't understand about char levels. I didn't understand about still sizes. As soon as I learned that, all the information started to click. So I think that people should really try to go right back to ground one and speak to these people that companies are hiring and employing to go out and teach people this stuff, so you can get a base understanding nice and early, and then really concentrate on what's important.
Absolutely. I definitely encourage anyone to get involved with any masterclasses or anything that can level up the knowledge that they have about products and the industry. Blake, I want to ask you what you're learning about or exploring at the moment.
What I'm learning about exploring has actually really changed. It's been a bit of fun lately. It's good that we were talking about how I did study wine, because now that I'm back in a retail environment, wine's really important. So every day that I go to work, customers will be bringing bottles of wine up in the store that's actually just opened up just over 3 weeks ago now. It's this great place called Liquid HQ. It's a lot of fun. But they come up and they bring these different bottles, and as soon as they put that through, if I've got a window, I'm over there Googling it and figuring out exactly. I'm going back over different grape types like Zinfandel and Nebbiolo and trying out all these amazing different wines and taking a lot of stuff home, breaking the bank a bit. It's just kind of fun to go back to something that I'm really passionate about. I see wine as kind of like a cocktail in a bottle. It's something that a winemaker has chosen to harvest grapes in this area at this time and ferment in this size with this kind of yeast and ferment for this long before filtering or leaving on skin or carbonic maceration or pet nats and all this weird stuff. So it's great to go back and actually taste that, not be able to play around or twist or jig or try anything, see the flavors that happen before distillation. So I'm really studying a lot about that all the time. And then the other thing is I find that I'm going to training sessions a lot more. I've probably been to about 11 chartreuse tastings, I imagine. But every single time I actually prefer I take notes and I watch how people speak, how they deliver, how they tell you a story, how they get you involved. And starting something with a story can be immediately gratifying and satisfying for anyone that's sitting in there. So learning about how to speak, about how to talk and how to show and educate people on something, get them excited for a product is a really cool thing to do. So I guess those are the two main elements that I've been working on lately.
Yes. What innovations or innovative techniques have you seen in the industry?
There are some amazing innovative techniques, and it's really cool to sort of look into and understand, because you can also look a bit back in history about these innovative techniques. I know I talk about whiskey a lot, but when you look at, say, for example, Irish whiskey style of using malted and unmalted barley, it's because the government tried to find different ways to tax barley, and they ended up whiskey production, and ended up taxing malted barley. So distillers just started using unmalted, and that became synonymous with their style of whiskey. Now there are different things that I find really fascinating with the whiskey side of things, is that unfortunately we're running out, and we have to get creative. And there are different people that we can look towards, and which means that now we've got new and unique products to pass on to our customers that also require further education. So I guess it's kind of a two-parter of, first let's look directly at what's happening in the whiskey industry now. Let's say you work for a large, well-known whiskey distillery, ran by a guy named Glenn, and you go into the boardroom one day and you go up to these different people and you go, hey, look, I've got a hunch. I think in 12 years from now, whiskey is going to be 5 times more popular. I think we should ramp up production now so our 12-year-old single malt is going to have enough for everybody. I think that we should hire 3 new brewers. I think that we should double our staffing plans. I think that we should buy 3 new stills and order a new warehouse and buy 3 times more barrels and just start ramping up production now just in case I'm right. No one's going to say yes to that. So now we have to start getting creative. We're running out of old whiskey. We're seeing age statements dropped a lot, but now people are getting more creative. They're getting more forward-thinking. All of a sudden, we're seeing amazing products like the Glenfiddich IPA cask. We're seeing Mizunara cask whiskey in Irish whiskies. Who was it? Glendalough did a Mizunara cask, which was awesome, amazing product. We're seeing no age statement whiskies where they're taking whiskies aged in bourbon casks and then in a large proportion of young whiskey and then a little bit of old whiskey as well in different kinds of sherry barrels, or throwing them into different kinds of casks and even using little bits of peat and creating very complex styles of whiskey. And they're probably going to the Japanese as well. They're going to different people in Japan who, like Shinjiro Tori when he started Suntory with Masataka, who ended up forming Nikka. They made very unique, complex styles of whiskey. And now the Scots are going, shit, how can you teach us, please? And they're probably learning from that. So it's amazing to see how people are adapting with the changes in our industry, what we're doing to adapt, and also why gin has become so popular because of that. And now we've got this influx of new amazing craft products or interesting styles of things where we get to go back, and now the industry is shaping, they're evolving. People are going, all right, how can we make sure that people understand that these things are actually good? All of a sudden you've got this great focus on, hold on, just because a whiskey's older doesn't necessarily mean it's better. A whiskey doesn't always have to have an age statement. We can drop this whole regime and idea of just old men in sports coats with golf clubs in the front of their Porsche that they never use. You just have to be a whiskey drinker. These things are going. It's coming back to brand education. How can we make sure that everyone can enjoy this product? No longer targeting different markets. Let's just go after the men. Let's go after females. Let's go after this age bracket. Spirits and products and cocktails, they're for everybody. So now the industry is a lot more welcoming. I think that we're one of the most forward-thinking industries. Not to say that we don't have problems, but I think that we're doing a lot to try to make sure that everyone is part of what we're doing.
It's an interesting point that you bring up there about, because saying that it's very forward thinking, because I think that in a lot of ways hospitality is archaic, and I think that there's a lot of room for innovation that isn't taking place. And we've discussed this concept of age statements on whiskey disappearing, and the fact that there are new innovative techniques to age not just whiskey but other spirits. We've had a couple of episodes on that.
Was that who was it? The distillery from Tasmania, they're using a new...
There were 2 episodes on it actually, and I also mentioned... So we mentioned it in episode 1 with Alex Bell. Then we mentioned it in Dan Woolley's episode, which I think was about episode 20 or so. And then Deviant Distilling. That was it. That was a really interesting episode. Thank you. Thanks, man. It was that was very interesting, thinking about how they're doing things, and obviously having a gin background, you'd be particularly interested in what they're doing. But whiskey too, and aging spirits. So it's fascinating thinking about how traditionalists are complaining about these innovative techniques, and how there's almost these 2 schools of thought about whether we should be innovative with how we can produce these spirits, or whether the traditional way is the way. That's how what whiskey is, or a spirit of choice. I'm just using whiskey as an example here, because whiskey has a very strong following around this idea of it being aged for a long period of time, and that's what makes it so-called better, right? But it's interesting that you bring up that point because we've discussed it a lot on the episode. What changes do you want to see take place in the industry?
One of the first ones that I deal with quite frequently is that taxation on liquor, on the spirits that we produce, is absurdly high. It's crazy to think that we're trying to break out into export markets and we've got this global reputation for making amazing gin and wine and whiskey, and seeing just how much tax that we're paying on these things, to the point that it's more often cheaper to import a mass-produced product than it is to make it in our own backyard. That's a problem. That's a problem for our industry. Less than 3% of spirits drank in Australia are actually made in Australia. So what do we do about that? How do we solve this problem? And it would be good to see a little bit more leniency and to see how Australia could grow and now appreciates these craft products rather than worrying about binge drinking, all these different things. And that comes from education, and that comes from different parts of the industry that we're focusing on now. Our government needs to catch up a little bit. And the big scary bad wolf of alcohol taxation, you know, it doesn't need to be as high as it is. I mean, some other changes that you could look into are definitely equality in the workplace and fair workplace rules and laws, which can make it difficult on small businesses, but that can also be alleviated by just dropping some of this tax on the booze that we're selling in the first place. Why is it that retail can afford to pay staff members higher awards and rates than a lot of smaller craft bars that you go into, where these guys have got 7-8 years of experience and huge amounts of knowledge and skills that work very late nights, and we're getting paid often, that I've seen in this industry, less than a retail worker? That's a problem as well. So I think these are some areas that we really need to push forward and focus on.
Is that driven by revenue models in the industry and profit margins, and is it driven by the business end that the hospitality businesses can't afford to pay more for staff?
Margins in venues are so tight. If you're running on a 10% rate of return, and one time I backed a trolley into a mirror and broke a mirror, and that mirror cost, I think it was $220 to replace. Sorry. All right, we'll sell a few more cocktails tonight and we'll get that fixed. But when you're running on a 10% rate of return, take away wage costs and take away rent and bills and overheads and product costs, and a 10% rate of return, that's $2,200 in the till. That's the profit of that night gone, if these are the margins that you're running on. It's finding ways to alleviate that, making it easier for people to get involved in these businesses, and rather than just focusing solely on large chains.
So how would you afford then to increase wages in the industry?
If the cost of goods were dropped through taxation, that could be one step that you could make. We're seeing things more often like public holiday surcharges, which I think is great. It's not easy to do for a small business, but people are now more understanding that this is just what it costs to stay open, and that's what it costs for us to have financial security, rather than a venue just having to run on a skeleton team. Mm-hmm. The strongest go on the night, whether you like it or not, and the rest are cut from that roster. It's something that we see.
What are you doing personally to innovate and create within the industry?
I think we just have to talk about stuff. Exactly what we're doing now, exactly what you're doing with this podcast, is we're sharing opinions that might be a little bit scary or a little bit taboo to share, and just putting them out there, seeing what people think. And I think a lot of the times that some people may have some quite strong opinions on your podcast, I'm sure that you get a lot of comments of people that agree. And it's great to actually have someone that steps up. I mean, Pez Collier had some amazing things to say about the industry as a whole, and I really enjoyed his podcast, and just talk about some of these issues.
All right, next question for you, Blake. I'd like to know what your creative process is. What are the steps that you take to make your ideas a reality? So this can be, maybe you want to go on a bit of a use your comp spin. You're obviously very passionate about competitions. To give us some context, maybe you're thinking about a competition cocktail that you're creating, but it doesn't necessarily, for listeners at home, doesn't have to apply to competition cocktails. This could be, maybe you're designing a menu or a food menu for a cafe. It could be a totally different area of the industry. This is just about how you come up with your concept and then execute.
Oh, that's a good question. That's a really good question. I'm going to need a beer. Do you want a beer?
Absolutely, let's do it.
Here you go.
Thank you very much. Cheers.
Cheers.
What is this?
It's the Bad Shepherd Hazelnut Brown. It's brewed with Frangelico. It's just delicious.
Excellent.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. It's something I really enjoy too. I get to do so many different things now where I have to be a little bit creative and a little bit weird and a little bit different. Some of the things that I've done recently have been, okay, cool, how can we stand out? A lot of the time when I do a competition, I go, all right, I'm doing a cocktail comp. Let's make a great drink. And I focus directly on how I can really take that element of the brand and push that forward. How can I reflect what they're doing? And that might be in a Woodford competition. I went up to Sydney and I got to make a Woodford Old Fashioned for the master distiller of Woodford himself, the man Chris, and that was really cool. My drinks were very simple compared to some of the other drinks that were put forward, but I covered off 5 elements that they like to talk about. I covered off water source and talked about my ice. I covered off their unique style of distillation and I used a rotovap. I covered off how they char, and I actually burnt bourbon-soaked dried banana chips and actually trapped the smoke on the inside of the glass. How can I do that? But then I like to think about, cool, there's my drink done. What can we do to make it entertaining? For a Southern Comfort competition, I talked about this musician named Lee Hoskins Seagrave that I just made up, and about how he's from New Orleans and how they used to play
You
play
like
this
to make
music.
up your characters.
Oh yeah, I dress up a lot. One time I dressed up like Tyler Durden and just yelled at the judges and served the drink in a soap dispenser. That was for the mixing star.
Jesus. So your character was from New Orleans.
I didn't play the character. I told this story about this character. And I told this story about how in New Orleans with the street musicians, they don't just stop playing and then move on. Another musician comes in and starts playing with them. So while I'm telling that story, I've got a blues guitarist sitting on a guitar amp on top of the bar in front of the judges' faces playing a slide blues guitar riff. And then halfway through, I'm telling this story about how this tavern called Macaulay's was being shut down. So he bought it and he had to borrow money off the wrong kind of people and couldn't pay him back. And Macaulay's is where Southern Comfort was invented. And halfway through, I had a drummer start from the back of the audience and walk through the crowd drumming and stand next to the guitarist, and then a tambourine player, and then he pulled out a harmonica, and we made this drink, and we're getting more passionate and yelling it out, and we're telling this story, and then put the drink up. It was a twist on a julep with like some chamomile infused buffalo trace and all this kind of fun stuff, and then we were in time, so we garnished the drink with some live blues for the judges to enjoy it, because we were talking about the spirit of New Orleans was that Southern Comfort branding, and let's talk about the spirit of New Orleans, and that's like music. So we garnished it with a blues guitar solo, and I pulled out an electric guitar from underneath the bar and did a solo on the bar top with a band while the judges had to drink a drink. That was fun.
That's awesome. Did you win?
No.
Oh, why not?
Maybe I don't know. It comes down, that's what I like about the integrity of some competitions, is it can come down to who's got the best drinks. Sometimes they come down to other things, and that's fine. I wasn't in there to win. I was in there to have a hell of a good time and do something cool that I can be proud of and show everyone that competitions are fun. Competitions should be a lot of fun. So that was part of the creative process from there, but then it can get different. That's one instance of one of the areas that I have to be creative. Another instance, I'm going to just turn this still off. Woo! James, man, we've made some gin. Another instance is, let's say I'm running a cocktail menu for a venue, and all of a sudden I think about it differently. Every single drink is a piece of a machine. I think about the size of my rail and where my bottle placements are and what I need, and I look at the stuff that has to be in that rail. How can I utilize those? How can I get a good balance of different drink styles? I generally make a menu that's divided into short, sour, citrus-driven drinks, and then I'll have maybe a taller, spritzier style of cocktail, and generally I'll have a vodka drink that's quite fruity and makes a bit more margin, and then I'll have the big stir-down stuff, and I see how can I add theatre, but how can I speed that up through processes of batching or just designing a cocktail menu that works around my rail, around my drinks, around my food, around the feel and style of the venue, and then I look into products and I go, cool, let's say if I want to work with, Woodford Reserve, and I go, cool, they're with Brown Foreman. What else can I do? Then I might want to say, I want to work with this rye whiskey and that's 1776. Let's find out what else is in Artisan Handcrafted's portfolio and how can I use that and start working and getting volume going for the sake and the benefit of the bar, to build supplier relationships and then get these discounts that I can either use to boost more margins, to offer my staff more wages, or pass those discounts on to my customers. And where can I discount certain drinks to the point that people that really love good booze are going to get a good deal, but then people who just want to go out and have a good cocktail and have a bit of fun, maybe I can make a bit more money off that. And the whole thing changes. And then I got to go to an event or a training session. I've done very serious corporate tastings where we sit down and we talk about distillation. I've done a little bit just basic knowledge. I've done really hardcore, amazing trainings with great bartenders who need to know exactly what we're doing and everything from reflux to still temperatures to cuts and percentages. And then I've done like gin trainings for a bit more fun, sort of younger crew of bar on a floating barge where we had a super soaker full of gin and tonic. And if you did well, we topped up your glass, and if you chatted a bit too much, it's got a Nerf gun attached to it and you get shot in the face. That's fun. Being creative, the longer you get into this industry, the more you start to think about the little areas. And I've worked in the same whiskey bar 3 times now, on 3 separate occasions. And every time I'd go back, I'd have a very different way of thinking and implementing procedures. I mean, the first time I was there, I was just there to learn. The second time I was there to really work with the cocktails and spirits. And I wanted the coolest stuff. And I wanted to be the coolest bartender in this really cool bar. And the third time it was going, how can I be creative and make this more efficient so the team's more looked after? How can I make sure that it's more about my bar team working? And that's a really fun way of figure out your priorities, figure out what you've got in front of you, and then figure out what you want to accomplish before I even put pen to paper about a drink. And admittedly, sometimes that can hold me back.
I want to go deeper with this question.
Yeah.
How do you get into a creative state to come up with these ideas? So, like, personally, I like to have a glass of wine and sit in my chair and listen to music and think. Like, that's my most creative state. Otherwise, I have a coffee. I have a coffee and I sit in a cafe and I watch. For me, getting into a creative state is something that I just try to do every day. But how do you get into that creative state to develop your ideas?
I get into a mental zone. I get creative as I go somewhere quiet. I'm really picky about background noise. I'm really picky about lighting. My partner hates it. She runs and turns all the lights on, and I run around and I turn them all off again, and I turn on the lamp and I put on certain background music, and I can't have a conversation with the bathroom fan. It's tricky. So I like to go somewhere quiet, somewhere I'm comfortable, and I'll get into a zone and I'll try to turn off the Facebook and the Facebook Messenger and no more distractions, and I really try to delve into something. And I enjoy stories. Once I read a story and I get a little bit hooked into it, that's when I start thinking. Like, a great example is we did a drink for Junipalooza, and I sat down and I was going over some of the notes from our gin, and it's named after a woman named Lana Turner, and she was proposed to by the owner of the Yankees with a diamond ring and a gin martini. And I was like, that's a cool story. And all of a sudden, every other distraction is gone now. I'm invested solely in that. I've got ADD. A shiny light and I'm out again. So I can get into a story and get into a great headspace. And then we ended up trying to beat his cocktail. So we did a stirred down drink with gold and white truffle infused Lillet and a discontinued absinthe in a crystal glass instead of a plastic cup for $120 a drink at Junipalooza, and we sold out because it was garnished with a real $100 note. It was the dumbest thing we've ever done, but it was...
That's so good.
It started as a joke, and Dave, our distiller, just went, do it. That's really funny. Just do it. So we did it, but it came from turning off the distractions and finding an interesting story and then focusing on that, and that, it gave me an inspiration. You put me in front of a bar with 300 products and go, make something. I don't know what to do, but you say, all right, cool, this is why I like comp so much, is I need you to do something that tells this story. Yeah, cool, gotcha. What's next? What's for breakfast? Let's go.
Blake, you've mentioned comps a few times in the episode. Tell us a bit about the competition you did with Storeroom.
When I was working in that little gin bar I was talking about earlier, when I met the guys from Patient Wolf, I had this idea for a cocktail competition.
Which was a whiskey bar.
It was supposed to be a whiskey bar. It was supposed to be a whiskey and gin bar. Originally I had 18 whiskeys and 9 gins, and then I had 18 whiskeys and 18 gins, and then the gins just kept flying off the damn shelf, and I was really annoyed, but it was cool because it was actually more fun talking about the gin than the whiskey.
But the comp you did.
Yeah. So the competition, I had this idea, and I went to the distillers and I went, can you give me 4 bottles of gin? And they gave me 6. So we had a bit to play with. It was great. And I put out this comp, said, all right, guys, these are the rules of the competition. If you've never competed before, you're allowed to enter. Chris Highstead, no, go away. No, you can't enter. And that was really cool. All of a sudden, all these people went, I'm not going to compete against someone more experienced. Now I can actually put my name forward. And then we went, all right, rule number 2, you have to compete with somebody else who has. But you can't work together. That's lazy. Go away, make a friend. So we had these people that would message us going, I'd love to enter, but I've got no one to compete with. And I'd actually ask them, what's your favorite bar? where would you like to work in Melbourne? They'd say, this place. And I'd run over to that bar and go, hey, I've got this guy who's really keen. Can someone... So it was a networking opportunity. And then on top of that, I went, all right, guys, you don't have to stock the brand. It doesn't even have to be on your back bar. We just want you to play around and send us an idea. So then people were going, great, I don't have to convince my manager to order something in. And then it was, doesn't matter about who you are or where you work. You could work at Gin Palace. You could work at a pub. So it was just kind of went, all right, everything's judged anonymously. I removed everyone's name and everyone's venue. And you just tell us a story about your drink. No exact specs. You can tweak it a little bit. No big deal. And then I read those out to the distillers. And they were competing for a bottle of gin. Like, that was it. It was just fun. And we had some amazing entries. There was no Instagram post, nothing required. We had people from Taylor Kendall and Kara from Eau-de-Vie and Cookie rocking up with a canister of liquid nitrogen, nitro muddling sage. Then we had Dave and Zach from Mr. Miyagi and Boss Oku rocking up and shaking up a drink with shiso leaves called Shiso Horny while stripteasing to George Michael and serving it in a porn magazine. That was fun.
That's gold.
It was great. They didn't even win. That was a hard call. Because David just stopped talking for the first time ever. It was amazing. But this was really fun. It was kind of cool to see, all right, let's do something that's more beneficial to some smaller members of the industry, because this is a smaller gin brand. That's how we ended up working together. Comms are great. They push you. They make you think in a different sort of set. They push everyone to be more creative. And you get to make a drink that doesn't have to work in a venue. You can make something stupid that's infused with this and rotovapped and aged in a shoe, and that you would never be able to sell to a customer. And then be like, look what I did. And everyone can turn around and go, that's fucking cool. That's a really fun thing. So to do that comp and how I ended up working with Patient Wolf was literally just doing that. It was great.
Blake, I want to ask you what your biggest challenge is right now.
Organization. It's so different moving back into an area where I get to record and write everything down. I actually left small bars for a while. I went on hiatus and I went to these big companies, and I opened up a hotel that had multiple venues in there and hired a bunch of staff and wrote procedures. I went to a large venue, a very busy dining restaurant with a bar downstairs, and worked on and learned how they run back of the house operations and how they do different things. And then I went back to my small bars and took that knowledge with me. And that's where I think I made the jump from a bartender to a really good manager that could oversee and record and pass on data. And that's really fun to learn, but also really challenging to do, is to make sure that every day you got to maintain those forms. You got to check off and oversee and manage those bar checklists. You have to dedicate roles and delegate tasks to your staff members, and then oversee that they're doing them, and give people more involvement in the business. That's hard to follow up. It's hard to get into a procedure when you're working the bar each night. When you're in service as well, you're not just stepping back, but also one that's very rewarding. So it's all about learning how I can do this within the gin industry now, and record and analyze and show people what I've been doing.
So through that, ultimately, where do you want to be?
I've got an idea of what I want to do, where I want to go, where I want to be.
Tell us about that.
Whoa. I can't say too much. It's an idea I've had very recently, speaking to an amazing mentor of mine, Jose from Casa de Vinos. I worked in this little shop after I broke my ankle. And I rocked up, I think 7 people tagged me in a post on the Bartender Exchange going, oh yeah, Blake would be great for this role in a liquor store. And I rocked up with crutches, and he looked me up and down. I went, hi, I'm Blake Hall. It was oh shit. But it was the most amazing place that I worked for, and I think I want to take on elements of what I've done in whiskey bars, elements of what I've done in retail, and merge those way down the line. I've got a little pipe dream that's up close to my head and closer to my heart that I think that I'd love to build one day. But in the meantime, I think I'm just going to keep working with the guys at Patient Wolf Gin and just trying to keep making good booze and learning how to distill and passing on that knowledge, because I honestly have got a lot of love for these guys.
So what plans do you have for the industry and how you want to contribute?
Let's all learn and teach each other. Let's break down barriers and talk about subjects and really come together as a family. Do things together. It's great to see some of the progress that we've made towards that. Let's all share knowledge and just come together and have a bit of fun. It's an important industry, and I think that there are certain elements that people need to take more seriously. There are a lot of things that I'm finding young people are moving further into management roles at a much younger age due to the fact that there are much more cocktail bars and more shout out for good quality staff and more information available. Whereas when I was 23, I didn't have those skills. I didn't have that ability. Now I'm working with 23 and 24 year olds that do. So let's just push ourselves to be a bit more organized and push ourselves in the areas that are less fun and pass on knowledge and benefit as an entire team. Because it's great to see staff jumping around from venue to venue when they're younger and then moving into somewhere more stable. I think someone's talked about it before is, do you have anything that you can learn from this venue now? No. It's time to move on. Let's keep passing on as much knowledge as we can.
This is my last question for you, Blake. What is the next step for you?
Let's just see how far this gin brand goes and how much I get to grow with this project that we're doing. I mean, I've been working on a little something with a friend of mine that's a bit more bar related, which I guess we'll see in the next few months, which is going to be really interesting. But apart from that, I'm really excited to be working in the gin industry and pushing that forward and seeing what new products and new lines that we can create and what new things that we can do.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for being on the show today, Blake, and I'm looking forward to having our gin that we've made today.
Looks good.
Thank you very much for the beer. It reminds me of a chocolate and hazelnut porter I had.
God damn.
It's delicious.
Sign me
I like
up.
this anyway. But thank you very much, and looking forward to chatting again soon.
Pleasure's mine.
Cheers.
Stay in touch with the show after hours at Hospopreneurs on Twitter, Instagram and Facebook. Creativity and innovation in hospitality. The Hospopreneurs Podcast with James Henderson. Sound like tomorrow. Sweet as sound. What does tomorrow sound like? Let's show you.